Hi everyone, it's been a while, but I found some old footage back from my Nurse Joy dress, and I figured I would try to make a tutorial out of it. So I started out with some fabric, and I folded it in half, and then folded it in half again. So I would have 4 layers of fabric. In this corner I have all the folds, and I measured out my inner circle. I used a circle skirt calculator and I will link it down below in the description. I just put in my waist measurement and it will tell me how long the radius is, and that I just mark on that inner corner. Then I measure how long I want my skirt and mark that on the bottom of my fabric. I just used some chalk to put a mark down every couple of centimeters, and then I connected all these markings so I could draw a line on where I need to cut it. To be able to get into the circle skirt, I cut open the back, so I only cut open one seam. And then when you unfold the fabric, this is what it should look like. A ginormous donut with a slit in the back. Next I take my pattern and I place it on the fabric and cut it out. I made my pattern by taping myself in, and I will put the tutorial that I used in the description as well. I have a middle front that I put on fold here, and then I have one side front, one side back, and one middle back. And I already calculated my seam allowances in my pattern. Then put them right sides together and pin them. So I sewed all these seams first, and then I sewed the shoulder seams together, all with just a straight stitch. To stop my fabric from fraying, I used a zigzag stitch on all these edges, and then to help my fabric lay flat, I clipped in all these curves. This way it would lay a lot smoother against your body. Then I put my skirt and the bodice right sides together and I pinned them. I made sure that the middle of my circle, so the middle front, and the front of my bodice both lined up, and then I just pinned all around it. This I also sewed with a straight stitch, and then I used a zigzag stitch against fraying. Next I pinned in my zipper, and with zippers I usually like to baste them before I actually sew them in, so I can try it on and check the fit. I used a blind zipper, but I didn't have a blind zipper foot, so I just used my regular zipper foot, and I will link a tutorial on how to put in a invisible zipper in the description as well. I used a seam ripper to remove all my basting stitches. Once my zipper was installed, I sewed close the bottom of my skirt. Then I needed some puffy sleeves, and I wasn't sure how to draw these, so I just tried a bunch of stuff out, and I started by taking my side front and my side back pattern piece and taped them at the shoulder seam. Next I took a piece of newspaper and I traced all around the shoulder of my pattern. I made sure to mark where my shoulder seam was on that pattern, and then I put in some seam allowance. Then I measured from where my shoulder seam was on my dress down until where I would like my puffy sleeve to end, and I marked that on the paper. Then I measured around my bicep where the sleeve would end, and I also marked that on the paper, making sure that my middle would be at the same spot as that shoulder seam. So this is the pattern I started with. Then I put that on more newspaper and then cut my pattern into some pieces so I can make it bigger to make it bigger so it would actually be poofy. So I just cut it in strips and I taped them on the paper. Sorry that it's a bit hard to see. Then I traced around it and I made it just a little bigger just in case. I took an old sheet and then cut my pattern out of it just to see if it would be the shape that I wanted. Once I was happy with the shape, I took my pattern and I cut 2 pieces out of my actual fabric. On here it is on fold, so I can get 2. Then I fold them right sides together and I sew close this short piece, which will be your underarm seam. I sewed those closed with a straight stitch as well. And then I hand basted the top of my sleeve so I could gather the fabric. Then I put the underarm seam right against the side seam of my bodice and pinned it in place. Next, I divided all those gathers all across the top of my sleeve so it would fit inside the armhole and I would have even gathering all around it. I only wanted the gathers on top, so I think I measured about 10 centimeters of it being straight, and after that I started gathers. I just smooth it out, pin it down, and then straight stitch it on my machine. Then I tried it on to see if I still liked the shape, and I decided to cut off the bottom to make it straight again. And I did the same for my second sleeve so they would be symmetrical. I used the measurement from my bicep to cut 2 strips of fabric and I made sure to double them up. I think they ended up being about 10 or 12 centimeters wide, and then the length would be my bicep and about 2 centimeters for a seam allowance. I cut these out. And then with the right sides together, I stitched close that short side and then folded in half with the seam on the inside. This will give you kind of a cuff that fits around your upper arm. I marked the middle, which was right across my seam. And after hand basting and gathering the bottom of my sleeve, I pinned that cuff onto that bottom, making sure that I had my underarm seam against the seam of the cuff and then the middle of the cuff where I marked it against the middle of my sleeve, so I could divide the gathers evenly again. Pin everything in place and use the straight stitch again to sew this. It's all right sides together. So you will have 2 layers from your cuff and 1 layer from your sleeve. And then when you fold your cuff out again, you will have a neatly finished poofy sleeve. I drew my collar pattern pretty much the same way as I did my sleeves. So I taped together the shoulder seams, but this time from the middle front and the middle back panel, and I traced around it, making sure to mark that shoulder seam, then added some seam allowance and drew out this shape that I thought I would like. Then I cut my pattern out and I again tried it out of some scrap fabric first, and once I was happy I used this pattern on my actual fabric. And you will need 2 layers for the left side and 2 layers for the right side. And then pin them together on the 2 short sides and the long outside. Use a straight stitch to sew them. So this will give you a left color and a right color, so to speak. Make sure to leave open the part that goes around your neck. Once you have your 2 layers sewn together, I cut off the corners and then I went around it with a zigzag stitch just to make sure it wouldn't fray, and then I clipped my curve, and to help the seam lay flat I understitched the collar, which means that I folded all of my seam allowances to the back side, the part that will be on the bottom, and I top stitched this in place. This will make sure that those top stitches are on the bottom of your collar and you won't see it on the top. Then you can turn it right side out and push the corners out so they look nice and crisp. Make sure to give it a good press, and then you can stitch it to the dress. And you will stitch it with the top side of the collar to the inside of your dress, which feels really weird. But once you've sewn that with a straight stitch, you can fold your collar to the outside and you won't be able to see your seam. And I also understitched this, so I folded all my seam allowances to the bottom, so to my bodice part, and then I top stitched it all in place. Then I tried it all on to see if I was happy, and I wore it with a petticoat underneath, and I decided that my collar needed some more pressing, and afterwards I ended up hand stitching my collar to my dress at those corners at the front and at the side seam and at the back right next to my zipper, just to help it lay flat. And last but not least, you need to hem your skirt, of course. Unfortunately, I didn't film this, but I just folded it over about a centimeter and then folded it over again and stitched it all in place. This was some pretty old footage, but I hope it can still be helpful. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe to my channel, and I have some more pictures of this costume on my Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for watching!